Hey everyone, today I'm going to be marker rendering a full-length design using Prismacolor, chart pack, and a few color pencils and miscellaneous illustration materials. So first things first, we already have a croquis established and we have to illustrate the design on marker paper using just any fine lead pencil. We don't want the actual pencil markings to be too thick or too kind of heavy on the paper because we don't want to make any marks that can't be relieved by our finishing techniques later in this tutorial. So what's really important is that we just kind of establish the clothing first onto the figure. And ironically so, it's kind of like paper dolls where you kind of select the first onto the figure and then we fill in all of the other attributes of the model that are not having any clothing covering the skin. So there are quite a few different ways to approach this. I always like to swatch my markers first so that I can determine what side of the paper I want to use as my right side, if you will. So you can see here that I've flipped the paper to the opposite side and I just want to double check how the markers are bleeding through to what will be the right side ultimately. When you're laying down your markers, it's super important that you're working a little fast because the consistency or the saturation of the markers on the marker paper will look inconsistent. And I always tell my students that it's okay to leave a little bit of the white showing because we have to consider where the light source is coming from and what type of fabric we are trying to represent in the rendering. So what's also really, really important is making sure that you're using the marker to your advantage because you want to create that depth of feel or the impression that there's movement or 3 dimensions to this garment. And yeah, so I thought it'd be best to do a tutorial where I'm demonstrating a lighter color and a darker color because the techniques are very, very different. With lighter colors, obviously you have a lot more room to play. In this case, I thought that I'd use this like pastel pink. I don't even know that I'd call it pastel because it's very, very, very light. But the Prismacolor markers versus the chart pack, which you can see I used Prismacolor for the top and chart pack for the bottom, they have just a different saturation really. But with my top, since I'm using this lighter colored marker, I'm able to go onto the right side of the paper as well to give a little bit more shadow and depth to the sleeves, armholes. We want to make that scrunch in the waist a little bit more pronounced because it makes the garment look a bit more real, although it does have these princess seams. We just want to give it a little bit more realistic effect in the drapery. You can see I also did that with the sleeve situation where it's bent in the arm, and we'll add a little bit more shading to that later. It's okay to erase and refine perimeters of either the skin or the garments, and thankfully later in this tutorial you can actually let's say do some cleanup, if you will, when we outline the skin and the garment. When I'm laying out the skin color, what's really important is to work and work and work it with the marker then and there so that you can create like those darker areas. Sorry about that. You can create those darker areas where cylindrical perspective comes into play because the body is not flat. So it should be darker at the sides, again, depending on where that light source is coming from. It's just vital to kind of enhance those areas in marker while it's wet so that you can give the figure a little bit more of a realistic representation. This is a walking pose or a walking figure, so one leg is foreshortened and we have to add some gray to that later so that we can create kind of like a shadow effect to really give the impression of her walking or coming towards you. Yeah, so I could go on and on for days about rendering and different markers. For hair, I like to just lay out a solid color as a base and then go in and touch up later with color pencil. Otherwise, let's see what I'm up to next. Picking out a marker, more swatches. I would usually label the swatches by the marker name or code so that if I come back to it later or continue with the collection, I know which markers I've used. But again, you can always just swatch later on another sheet of paper. But here I'm using like a 20% gray, I believe it's a cool gray marker, and it's just to kind of enhance those areas where there is that shadow. Very lightly going over the scrunches at the waist and those princess seams. And you can see it's already starting to kind of like pop off the page. And that's really important because using the right tones of marker is going to help create that realism about this sketch. And I always get this question, why is she so tall and skinny? She's an alien from another planet. I don't make the rules when it comes to fashion sketching or why they are alien, Amazon, 7-foot tall women from this like fantasy place of fantasy. But look, we're using the blender. It's amazing. Oh my God, the blender's great. The blender helps to kind of resaturate the marker. I kind of like went a little overboard with it because I think I was like, oh, I'll just touch up some things later. But yeah, to clean your markers, you can always just open to the back of the pad and kind of brush them off to get any other color off of the tip. But yeah, good times. For this skirt, since it is a dark gray, I use a very fine tip Tombow marker just to outline and kind of enhance that a bit more around the edges, going in with a few other gray markers to just give a little bit more oomph to that perimeter. Blender again, super important to have. And just reinforcing like the bust area and giving a little bit more movement, because although fabric might have stretch or it might be a woven, there should still be some encouragement of showing the actual form under the clothing. You can always use different shades of marker. It doesn't always have to be the same marker that you've used for the base color. That's why we have so many different gray options. If you look to my video of when I was organizing my markers and I was freaking out because I didn't realize I had so many grays this whole time. But yeah, actually I'm using a light gray here. It's a Copic marker. I just love the Copic markers. I just think they have such a really soft effect with that brush tip, although I'm not like crazy about the brush tip. I think you lose a little bit of control, but it depends really what you're trying to create with your figure. And last but not least, we have to go in with outlining. The skin we always outline in a brown color pencil. Dark umber is one of the go-tos by Prismacolor for outlining skin. You want it to be very, very, very sharp because in reality, the body does not have an outline. For the eyes, I just use a black so I can kind of enhance that like kohl liner effect. Eyebrows, I go back in with a dark umber. If you're using a color to enhance the lips, like a lipstick, you can just use that and then touch up with the brown marker later. I always love to use some eyeshadow to just kind of give a little bit of glimmer to the eyes. When you're rendering hair, you just want to kind of feather out those individual strands to be sure that it looks realistic. It doesn't have to be over-rendered. You can always go back in later with like a micron to just kind of enhance those strands if you like. But clothing is typically outlined in black. So outlined in black sharp color pencil to really make that silhouette pop or feel a bit more enhanced and just more solid. But you can see already that this is making it feel just having like that movement, that gesture that we're trying to represent with the clothes. And it really helps to translate to production so that when this illustration goes to that department outside of design, that they know, okay, maybe there is a little bit more volume in the sleeves. They have to talk with the specking or pattern making department for figuring out like how much fullness they'd like. And just adding some shadows. Don't forget shoes. They're not the most important part of the figure, but accessorizing and styling is kind of like key to individualizing, you know, who this customer is, where she's going. You don't have to add too much detail because you don't want that to take away from the overall look that you're representing. Just cleaning up a bit here, there, getting rid of some of that lead pencil, and then we'll do some more touching up. I just took a 10% gray and added that to the back of my marker pad so that it would make the look, give that impression of it walking and a little bit more shadow. So I hope you enjoyed this ramble, but yeah, more to come. Thanks for stopping by.